Go ahead, Paul.
Great. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. So from that brief introduction, you'll know that I'm not a theologian. I'm a business person who just feels called or encouraged at this time to get the church moving, I think, in a different way, and think about differently on how it can respond to what's happening in the climate change environment. And so today I really want to just walk you through some of the work that we're doing in Oxford. And just by way of background, this happened and came together really as I was having conversations with the Bishop of Oxford and on another subject, and he asked me about climate change, and I said at that stage that I thought the Church of England was missing in action on climate change. And that's not to take away from any of the work that's going on, and there's a lot of solid work that's going on. But I think I would stand by that statement in the sense of where it sits in its profile, where it sits in its public discourse, and where it sits in reaching out to the many, many congregations. And so the challenge I put to the bishop, and has since been picked up, was to see if we could do things in a different way. And as a result of that, we had a meeting in October last year where we had 40 people attend, including leading theologians, behavioral scientists, climate scientists, priests and vicars, to talk about what we could do differently and how we could enhance our response to the Church of England and to climate change. So let me just be very clear. I think, climate change is going to be one of the biggest issues that the church faces for the next 20 or 30 years. And the last 6 months, I think, has moved the dial significantly with Greta Thunberg, Extinction Rebellion, and the Net Zero Agreement. And I think there's a growing sense that amongst young and old, that it's not business as normal, as usual. And I think what is upsetting as a businessman, I look at this and I say, this is a macro trend that's going to last 30 years. And yet in that, we have an incredible relevance as a church in our theology, in our understanding, in our unique perspective on this subject. And yet largely, I do not feel that we're a voice that's being heard. And so there was a feeling that we need to take leadership role for the sake of the planet, for the sake of the church, for communities and individuals. And I would challenge, and I've met now with probably 6 bishops who are leading bishops who on the climate change area, and to ask them around what is the battle that we're facing and which battle do we want to pick. And at the moment it seems very strange because we're facing COVID, we're facing an economic challenge, we're facing issues of racism. And those are all massively important. But in the context of all of those, climate change is something that's going to be going on for 30 years or more, and is going to be bigger than all of those issues and last longer. And finally, I would say that this is mission, that this is reaching out and meeting people where they are and applying with the gospel to probably one of the biggest issues they're going to face in the next 20 years. So by terms of definition, we're really interested in planetary health, including climate change. So it's not just climate change. It's about biodiversity. It's about water resources. It's about a whole bunch of things. What we haven't done is choose to use political capital or energy on fighting for the issue of divestment. I have met with the church commissioners and I've talked to them about their divestment plans. And I think there is a degree of consistency in the sense that we all want to reach the same aim. They've created a sense of trigger paths that have to be triggered. And they will divest by 2023 if companies are not consistent with a 1.5 degree planetary health. And where they sit today, that means 80 to 90% of their oil and gas stocks will need to be divested by 2023. So quite frankly, it's not a battle that I want to fight because I think there are bigger battles to win. The other thing, as I say, is we're focused on the Anglican Church at this time. There's a lot of really, really good work going on, particularly in the Catholic Church, and I think there's much we can learn from them in the sense they're way ahead of us in a lot of the work that they've done and the leadership from the Pope. This is mainly focused in the Diocese of Oxford, and the Bishop of Oxford is fully supportive of this, and the Bishop of Reading, Bishop Olivia, is actually the person chairing the task group. But we're very clear that what we are doing is designing something that's scalable. This is a program which is being tested in Oxford with a view to being run across the whole of the UK and potentially much wider across the whole of the Church of England. And critically, it's moving beyond what I call boilers and buildings. And I spent 30 years in the energy industry and know a lot about boilers and buildings, but this is moving beyond boilers and buildings. And it's moving to hearts and minds of the many hundreds of thousands and millions of Christians in the Anglican Church. So what we've done is essentially set up the Environmental Action Group, and we have a number of work streams, so theology and training, EcoHub, which is about creating an online resource for data and information, how we get to net zero, the diocese buildings and programs, so that is very much about boilers and buildings, but that's just one part of it. Community and outreach and engagement, which is the bit that I'm leading on, and then finally advocacy and influence. So let me just take you through in a bit of detail what we're doing. And so the biggest part I see it is about how do we outreach to communities, to churches, and take them through a number of stages. And that is about the facts, understanding the facts about climate change. And we've been working with leading scientists who I'm going to come and talk about in a minute. Then talking about the theology, and finally, what can we take them through into action? And in many ways, I would say that the facts are pretty clear, and they have been known actually for the last 30 years. The theology, I would say, is pretty clear, although there's some areas of contention. But really the issue is, how do we move people into action? And how do we create behavioral change where people change their attitudes, change their actions, and change what they do? And in a sense, if the church is doing anything, I would say that we should be experts in behavioral change, in changing what we do. And so the idea is to create both the imperative for change, but also a toolkit that resources enables individuals and communities to choose what they want to do and to signpost them to existing resources. So we are not trying to create everything new. Where possible, we're trying to signpost them to existing organizations. But what we are trying to do is create a comprehensive program or process that takes people through that. And I can say, having been in a number of churches in Oxford and before that, I don't think I've once had a sermon that has taken me through the facts, the theology, and what I can do about climate change in a coherent manner. So in the theology, there is the need to recognize areas of complexity and of historical debate, and we accept that. And so a lot of the conversations we had in the beginning were all about dominion. Where does dominion sit? What does that mean in terms of our right to use the planet as we wish? And I would claim and say that in many of those conversations, people have over-focused or over-indexed on the concept of dominion without putting it in the context of so many other areas of our faith, including equality, justice, stewardship, fairness, love of our neighbor, all of those other things. And I think when you put dominion in that context, I think it leads you to a very different set of answers and actions. The other thing is, I think we need to challenge the privatization of faith versus collective action. And how do we deal with this spiritual secular divide, the SSD virus, as people call it, which is actually my faith is something I do individually as opposed to the need to do something collectively. And what is the power of having collective action? And as we speak about behavioral science and some of the things that we're doing, we'll just talk about why collective action is so important in leading and supporting individual action. And then finally, recognizing the different perspectives on renewal. So in the conversations I have had, people have said, well, the earth is going to be remade anyway. You can look at Revelation. Why are we worried about it? It's all going to be made new. And that is a perspective. It's not one I hold on to because I think there's many reasons why, if you look within the broader context of stewardship and love and justice and equality and care for creation, I don't think it's a case of just letting our sinful nature and sinful practices just last until we wait to be saved. Let me talk a bit about the facts. And this is interesting because I met with the leading team at UCL, Chris Rapley, who's a leading climate scientist. And what he said is, you know, I've known the facts. The facts really haven't changed that much. They've been known for 30 years. But as a scientist, I have failed because I have failed to communicate and to get people to change their actions. And whether that's on an individual level or a governmental level, I feel as though I have failed. And so it's essential at this time, and especially as we come through this very interesting time of COVID, where the fact that we get facts out there which are certified by experts in the field and that people know what they can trust. We're moving into a time where you have fake news, fake facts. People are trying to discover what is truth and what is not truth. And therefore, having this, these experts, aligning them with the church who are trusted in their local communities is incredibly important. And importantly, it's also that we don't look at those facts as some detached experiment that is happening elsewhere. The reality is that these are going to happen in our lifetime. They are impacting our planet today. They're going to be impacting our children, our grandchildren. They're going to be impacting people across the world that we live with. And it is a fact that the most vulnerable, the least resilient societies are likely to be impacted the most through climate change. And so one of the key things that they were struggling is, well, what is it that we need to do to communicate the message? We know it, but how do we get people to actually change their behaviors? And so in that, we started working with some behavioral science experts from Imperial College and really looked at what is it we were trying to do to deliver change. And some of the concepts that we came up with was this concept of masterful. So setting a top level vision, but allowing individuals to work at their own pace, to give them agency, to give them the information, to empower them to make decisions, but to encourage them to go at their pace. I think there's a need to create and promote incubators of best practice. So where are those things that we can trial, we can experiment, and that we can replicate? And then a sense of urgency. So the fact is that we've been talking about climate change for ages, but most people would recognize that the next 10 years are absolutely critical. It's an interesting fact that during this time of COVID, our carbon footprint around the globe has cut by about 5% for the period of the COVID pandemic. And yet to hit the carbon targets that we need to reduce our carbon footprint 7% every year, year in, year out. And so the concept whereby we've just shut down the whole of the world's economy or large parts of it and only achieved a 5% saving, and yet we have to do that cumulatively year after year after year, just gives you the sense and the scale of the challenge ahead. I think another key area was that we want our message to be one of hope, and hope that we can make a difference. Hope that although it's too easy for us to sit there and say, well, look, all of the carbon is coming from China or from third world countries, so what can we do? And yet, as Christians, we have a narrative around hope. And that isn't a fluffy hope. That is a hope, I believe, that's bedded in the gospel, in faith and in trust. And so giving people hope and leading them to action, I think is absolutely essential. And then we will talk about, the journey of change and transformation. And again, seeking to get actions which are done as an individual level, are reinforced by the community, and then lead up to national levels. So many of this is about working with others, signposting, but creating a format. So some of the other considerations, which was to create an agency, an empowerment to choose what individuals want to do. We want to build community. What we're seeing is that, yes, you can do something for behavioral change as an individual, and that's great. But actually behavioral change is retained and has a much more long-lasting effect if others in your society and community are doing it. So as well as the individual action, we want to have community action whereby people can come together, and whether that's cleaning rivers, recycling, solar farms, energy efficiency, going on marches, having community action reinforces the individual action. And by building that, we believe that we can create scale. And so what we want to do is create a program and a process that, although it's developed within Oxford, we're very clear we want it to go across the whole of the Anglican community. We want it to be open to believers and non-believers. I met with Bishop David Walker, and Bishop David Walker is the Bishop of Manchester, said to me, what I love about this program is it facilitates one-offs. And what he meant by that was that there are one-offs who can come to church and are not necessarily needing to commit to anything, but to come off for a one-off exposure because they're interested in climate change and can walk through the door for the first time and have a conversation. And in that conversation can begin to understand why the Christian community has a unique input and a unique voice on issues of climate change. Clearly, the communication is absolutely key. And again, we drew up some very clear models about what we wanted to do. And we went into this, I think, with a view that we wanted to avoid guilt as a motivator, but focus on hope and agency and action. We wanted to promote change, but that promotion may also involve giving up things or using less consumption. It may mean changing lifestyles, where you may meet, air travel, maybe meaning buying less. But in doing that, we wanted to promote and present a better picture, a picture of a life with less consumption and less need and more time. And interestingly, perhaps COVID has challenged us a bit in all of this, that we've needed to travel less, we've been at home more, and we've consumed probably less. The exciting thing about this all is that together we believe we can make a huge difference. There are 86 million in the Anglican and 1.2 billion in Catholic churches. And so yes, as an individual, we may feel as though we can't change things, but as a collective and as a community, we have huge potential to make a real difference. And another area where we've talked about and been quite explicit is we believe that at the moment you have a difficult dialogue between the North and South churches. A lot of that is to do with arguments and debates around sexuality. And yet in this, we believe climate change has the ability to pull us together because we live on one planet. We have a common enemy. There are issues we need to face of restoration. There are issues of confession. The fact is that we in the UK started the industrial action and have probably burnt more than our fair share of carbon dioxide and are responsible for global warming. And it's people in the third world and less developing countries who are going to be most impacted by what we're doing. And so there is a need to embrace that difficult conversation. But actually, we believe that that's a positive for bringing churches together. I just want to talk a bit about our behavioral understanding, because on this, we've linked in with the Imperial College, UCL rather, and to talk about it and some of the things that we're talking about. So I've talked about information, but no action. And that's the climate scientists are worried about what do they do and how do they lead to sustained behavioral action. There's anger. You see that through Extinction Rebellion. There's anger at failing to take action. There's whole issues of intergenerational fairness, and climate change is one of those things. What is it that we're handing to the next generation in terms of the challenges, the costs, the environment? And if you think about the legacy, we've already baked in at least 1.5 to 2 degrees warming. And the fact is we could be ending up somewhere between 4 or 5% or higher, 5 degrees warming. And the impact and cost of that is going to be paid by the next generation and the generation after that. And so what are we doing and who pays for that? I've talked a bit about the North-South divide. I want to talk about climate anxiety and climate grief and hopelessness. If you believe that we are going to see massive changes in society due to climate change, and some of the data suggests that for every degree warming you'll see something like 200 million people being forced to migrate from their homes. So if you believe migration is a current problem in Europe, which it is from war and other things, can you imagine what happens when you have 200 million or 400 million people on the move because of climate change? And so the climate anxiety that is going to be present in the next generation and the generations to come is going to be huge. So how are we educating and teaching the leaders, the future clergy, about how to be pastors, how to mentor, how to deal with climate grief and hopelessness? And so one of the things that we're doing is starting to work with theological colleges to talk about how do they teach on the facts, teach on behavioral change, but also teach on behavioral change and deal with climate grief and hopelessness. So this is some of the trainings. So we're reaching into the schools, into youth groups, the theology and curate training and missionary teaching. It's about preparing them, I think, not only with the facts and the science, but also the emotions that deal with that. And it's about not having all the answers, but above all, creating a safe space which we believe we can work with communities and individuals to discuss and work through these emotions and move into action, move from a sense of hopelessness to a sense of hope. This is one of the things that we're doing, which is the Eco Hub. So we're gathering together basically a whole bunch of data, a whole bunch of information, of resources, and about how the church can have a voice and can be present. Last year, there were a number of climate marches from Extinction Rebellion and other places around the country. And I went to the one in Oxford. Many people were standing up and talking. There were people from trades unions, there were people from environmental causes, and yet nobody was there speaking up on behalf of the church. And to me, that is living our faith in the marketplace. And if we're not speaking in those events and talking about the reality of what people are feeling, then are we missing out? And are we not present where people want to meet us? And then finally, there's advocacy. And the question is, how can we bring our voices together? How can we create a movement where essentially we can create an impact and make change? And so what we're trying to do is signpost to existing organizations who we believe are doing things that are right and are supportive. So, for instance, Arusha or Tear Fund or Climate Stewards or Operation Noah. So we're not trying to replicate. What we're trying to do is scale and to give power, strength, finances, resources to those existing organizations to help them grow in partnership. And so we believe that having a strong voice, governments will need to face these issues, and there will be massive issues of climate justice, massive issues of helping countries in the third world. And what is our voice as Christians? And what is our voice, and how can we advocate? And how do we build a network of strength where we can be informed, and so that we can actually be seen as valuable contributors to that debate? Finally, I just want to put some post-COVID thoughts in. I think many people are thinking about how we did things in the past. And that's every single business, every single organization I know is looking at things. And they're thinking, what are the things that we did well? What are the things that have changed? What are the things we want to adjust or throw out? There is also a challenge to come back as we seek to rebuild the economy, which is how do we build back better? And somehow we need to start defining what better means. So what do we mean in terms of greener, fairer, more resilient, more equitable, more sustainable? And so we have a chance, and I can tell you that there are people working in Number 10 now and in the Cabinet Office who are looking at this economic package and who are thinking about what's included. And we need to be a voice there to say about what kind of new economy we want. Because I think many people will sit back and reflect and to say, actually, everything wasn't great beforehand, and maybe we can change things. And the other thing is link back to any change in society. The cost of going to net zero in the UK is probably going to be somewhere around about £100 billion. That has to be paid for. It's going to involve taxes, or it's going to involve costs, or it's going to involve behavioral change. And what governments are realizing, what the Climate Change Committee are realizing, is that you need to engage with people and take them on a journey. You need to have a safe space for that conversation. You need to have trusted voices, and you need to have a unique approach to these issues. And the church, I believe, can play a pivotal role in that discussion. And so the church, and the challenge to the church is, where is our voice at this time to encourage building back better with human flourishing? And much work is happening on what we want, maybe, or even how. But where is the voice talking about why? Why do we believe it's important that we underpin this new economy in a new way? What are the perspectives? And finally, I would just say that COVID has been terrible and has suffered, and I think the economic fallout will be significant. But I think will be seen to be small compared to climate change in terms of cost of lives, livelihoods, and environment. And for sure, I can guarantee that the timelines for the impact and the scale of these issues on climate are going to be much larger and a much greater magnitude than COVID. So that's the end, and it's hopefully that was helpful. I'm really happy to take questions or clarifications or anything else.
Well, thank you, Paul. And let me just tell everybody who's joined in, if you want to ask a question, if you click on the participant screen at the bottom, and there will be a little hand there that says raise hand. If you do that, then I can recognize you and line you up to ask the next question or comment. In that, let me begin. Paul, one of the things about the church that makes it a very unique institution, and let's just take the Anglican Church, not just the church generally, but if you could get a few churches like the Roman Catholic Church and various Protestant denominations, the network connections of the church around the globe are enormous. Even if our percentage in the population may have shrunk some, the wrap and the touch of the church and the Anglican Church in mission is incredible. What is being done to bring a behavioral link between leaders of the church, particularly of the two-thirds world? I mean, I think that's what OCMS is, and that's where, you know, even when we do these lectures, we have people from all over the world joining. What's being done with the Anglican Church to help bring this group together to bring transformational change in terms of the climate?
So if I'm honest, I think very little, and you have to take it. I mean, I'm the challenger outsider in this, so there'll be other people who will have different perspectives. What I would say is, you know, and I've written to the Archbishop. I've met with many bishops to talk about this, including the Bishop of Salisbury, who's the lead on this issue. And they still have a very belief on that this is really falls down to what is our responsibility to get the church buildings to net zero, which is boilers and buildings.
Yeah.
And at Lambeth 2020, they were due to spend 4 days discussing human sexuality and 1 day on climate change, and only after we fought for that 1 day. And
Yeah.
they were going to plan to do a lament walking through London in ashes for climate. Now, what I would say is that the church, as I've discovered it, is uniquely set up to not have an organization and structure to have, you know, to have responsibility and drive things through. It's almost set up not to do that. It's a collective. And that's also the power of it, but it's also an incredible weakness when you're trying to lead things. And I can tell you, it is the two-thirds church who are going to be impacted most of this.
Yes.
And it is our responsibility, I believe, as the Western churches, to be embracing that conversation now, to confess the things that we've done wrong, to look at recompense and to work together, because this is going to be a massive issue for the next 20 or 30 years. So the network is incredible, but without strong leadership, I don't believe we're really harvesting the benefit we could be getting.
Yeah, I would just say that you're probably more likely to get consensus north and south on issues of climate change than all the other things that are, we have to admit, are highly divisive globally and have divided the Anglican Communion over the last 20 years. So let me encourage that. I see Jyoti with that hand. I'm unmuting you, Jyoti. Go ahead, or hit your, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing this this talk. You know, at this time we are struck particularly by the issues of slavery and racism, colonialism, and there is talk, especially in American churches, around restitution and what that might look like. And I'm struck by the story of Zacchaeus. You know, Zacchaeus benefited hugely from the tax system that the Romans had put in place, but he was also exploitative. But when he met Jesus, the Bible tells us salvation came to the house of Zacchaeus, and he decided to give half of his wealth to the poor, but to restore 4 times as much from those whom he had stolen. And, you know, you have mentioned the issue of restitution today in your talk, because there are certain countries like this country which has benefited hugely from the industrial processes, and our carbon bill is going to be way beyond anything that that countries in the South are going to be encountering. And so I'm wondering, are these related issues that perhaps, if we're going to talk about a Zacchaeus Fund in some way, but maybe even a national Zacchaeus Fund, is this something the church could speak to? And is this actually something where the issues around climate and race, colonialism, slavery actually all meet each other?
Yeah, so I'm not a theologian, and I'll just say that to start with. I'll give you my personal opinion, which is, I think you start from confession, and I think you start from admitting problems and mistakes that you've made in the past. And I think you embrace that difficult conversation in a safe space. And out of that, I think you have a change of heart. And out of that, you look at recompense and what does that mean? I'd add some other things to that make climate change unique, I think, in the sense that we live in one planet. So it's not as though I'm paying you for something I did wrong in the past to do with slavery and there's a transfer of money. Actually, my impact today is continuing to impact you today. And actually, if I can help you today, yes, I can help you become more resilient by investing in and helping you do things. But actually, there are win-wins. So why aren't we setting up a trust to create a global trust for the Amazon, where essentially we can create jobs to protect the Amazon, to create biodiversity, and the Western natures fund that. And Brazil shouldn't have a problem with that if it's creating, employment and new roles. And it's also helping because there's a unified position. If we can teach people to cultivate soil in a different way so that it is not eroded, then those are benefits. And so we are interconnected. COVID, if anything, has taught us that. And so I do believe that there needs to be confession. I believe there needs to be asking for forgiveness. And there needs to be a program that actually sees us working constructively. But what better way to embrace the North-South divide than actually admitting and confessing and coming together? And maybe climate change opens up the door for many of those other conversations. We spend way too much time arguing and going over, difficult subjects of human sexuality, as opposed to facing something which a lot more people potentially are concerned about. So I do believe it's a potential role model for other areas, and I do believe it's important. And I do believe the West needs to take a leadership on it.
Good. I don't see a lot of hands there, but so let me encourage people to raise questions and make comments. Paul, let me bring back one other item, and you probably bumped into this, but you didn't mention it. They call it the 10% flip rule, that you don't need massive majorities to change society and change behavior. What social scientists have shown is that if you can gather like 10%, they said is kind of the tipping point of people who are all committed to a joint action. What might that message do in terms of the church and our gathering to actually affect change?
So I believe that hugely. And you've seen that, Extinction Rebellion, you've seen Greta Thunberg, that has shifted the dialogue, because in the political marketplace, people are seeing movement and action, and that has moved people. I don't think we'd have signed on to net zero under Theresa May without those happening. I just generally don't think there would have been the space. And politicians generally are not good at leading. They are good at following. They like to know that the public opinion has moved, and then they like to move where it is, especially now with some very populist governments. And so I believe that absolutely we can have that impact. And that is why I think the church now should be stepping up, because yes, we are only 5% or 6%, but as you say, the networks and the connections and the influence are much bigger than that. And actually it is that tipping point which can have a real change in society. And if you do look back, I look back on those heroes, I guess, who changed slavery, who changed emancipation. And yet this is our fight. I genuinely believe this is our fight. And this isn't going away. This is baked in from all the carbon we spent. This is with us for the next 30 years. And if we're not addressing it, people are going to say, where were you? What were you doing?
Yeah. Well, any other questions? I don't see anyone who has. Oh, here we go. There we go. I'll go to Tim Keene. Tim, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself, Tim.
Sorry. One of the early screens you put up talked about facts, and I can think of two things that undermine, quote, the facts. One is the prevalence of fake news, that now we no longer believe anything anybody tells us. But there's a kind of more sophisticated version of this. Tom Wright talks about facts being an 18th century gentleman. But until the 18th century, there weren't such things as facts. And so I was wondering, how do we create any kind of sense of assurance about the things that we're told?
And I think it's a great question, and I think it's a real concern, isn't it? Because we've seen lots of fake news, and even in the current COVID question, there's lots of, I don't know whether science is going to come out better or worse, if I'm honest, through COVID. And do we trust experts? 12 months ago, nobody should trust experts. Now we're all trusting experts. To me, the fact is you have a very broad, consistent consensus around climate scientists around what is the problem and what's happening. And the reality is that they have not only predicted this, but they've plotted it out on charts and are showing pretty consistent behavior. So to me, part of the position that you've got to counter some of this fake news on Facebook or on Twitter and other things is to have these experts that are willing to put themselves forward and say, this is the science, and we'll talk to you about why this is. And you can go and do the research if you want. If you want to dig deeper, go and look at these references. There will always be people who are going to contest something. And the trouble is, we're never going to be able to deal with those people completely. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that we're being proactive. And it's a bit like the anti-vax thing. I think the science is pretty clear, but there has been an unhelpful anti-vax movement, which has probably caused many problems. And so I think by lining up with some of the world's leading scientists, which we have, we believe we can create that discussion. I actually don't think it's a debate about the facts. I think most people in churches understand global warming's an issue and carbon's warming an issue, and this is it. They might debate how fast, and they might debate what are the issues, but I think the facts are generally accepted. I think it's much more linking in both the facts and the theology and leading them into action. And it's about action. How do we start making small changes, which then allow us to move into bigger changes? But we will have a continual fight on that, on the fact base, because people will come up with alternative facts. All we can do is hope that we are trusted, and I do believe that the church is a trusted voice still in society. And that's why, actually, that's why UCL want to partner with the church. It's not because of the speed of action, I can tell you that.
Well, that leads to another question on that regard. I mean, one of the things that I find in academia, and it's also true in the church, is we're kind of a gathering of Mars Hill people who like to gather around and talk about things. And so we have lots of conferences and lots of meetings and go to the hotel for a nice banquet meal and then go talk about it some more. What did U of L taught you about in terms of how do you get actual action from talk? What are the kind of steps that need to be taken so that we're not just the chattering classes, but we are actually people who are affecting change?
And so that's where the behavioral scientists come in. And so that's about creating this individual action. So what can we do? And this is a menu of action, essentially, we can lay out. So what is it you've heard us talk about the theology, you've heard us talk about the science, right? Let's move to action. What can we do? What is it you want to choose as a household to do? What do you want to do? And the great thing about this is it is an intergenerational issue. So the kids are really concerned about it. Actually, some people in the middle years are concerned about it because they're worried about it. And actually grandparents are thinking, actually, I'm worried about my grandkids. What am I going to do about it? So actually, this cuts across all age groups. And so as individual actions, what is it you can do? And it's about giving agency and choice and information so people can make those choices. But then more than that, how do we connect churches together? And so one of the things you might do is become an eco-church and sign up to a Rocha. But then if you're a small church, how do we link you with another small church so that you can share best practice and experience? How can we bring all of the churches together who are eco-champions? And this is one of the first things we're doing, is we're getting a list of all the people who are eco-leaders in their churches, and we're getting them together for a Zoom call to take them through and encourage them, because they're battling away to make change, but they're not feeling the support and sustainability from the rest of the community. And so how can we help? How can we create best practice? How do we create things and not reinvent the wheel 10 times, but give you models of what you can do in your church? And so I think it's all of that equipping and enabling that we believe we can make it easier and support the groups to do. And the behavioral scientists will tell you that actually it is more, if you want to lead to sustained change in anything, the first thing you have to do is start moving. You have to get them on the first move. And once you've done one thing, you are more likely to do the next thing. And that is the way you take people through a program of increased action.
Okay, Jyoti has a chat here. Can you give examples of what my church community can do? What could my small group work do on climate issues, even though climate seems like a global issue rather than a local issue?
Yeah, and so again, it's about, so first we have to answer the question about why can I do to make a difference? And the question is, if we all did that, nothing would get changed. So the question is, we can make a difference even in our small part of society. So I can tell you that St Aldate's, we've only just started an eco group, probably, I guess, 6 months ago. We've had a couple of meetings to talk about the science and the theology, and now we're really into the action. And we're looking around, well, actually, how do we bake that into our preaching? How do we break that into our worship? And then how do we bake that into action on the ground? So we are looking at a vertical wall, essentially a plant wall that would go right next to the street that could suck out and filter pollution. That's one example. How can we use the garden? How can we put solar panels on church buildings? How can we look at our energy costs and look at greater insulation? How can we do an energy audit? As individuals, what can we do about recycling? So we're all going to commit that we're actually going to recycle more, or we're going to do X. And then as a church, actually, we've already had a conversation with the Oxford Council to say to them, well, actually, how is your recycling work? And actually, is there a better way for it to work? And could we work with you? And we can start influencing those changes because we can come together as a diocese. Some people will have their own land and they will go and be able to grow crops or plant trees or have bees or whatever. You know, it's different for each context you're in. The most important thing is that you start. And again, we're going to have a checklist which tells you, you know, what is it that you can do.
We've got from Paul Woods, he says we need to think about the defective theologies involved, particularly the majority world. The strands of dispensationalism, pietism, and SSD are making progress difficult. Also, consumerism and convenience are massive factors as well.
Totally. And so let me, you know, underpinning all of this is the state of the human, and essentially, you know, if there wasn't sin, if there wasn't all of the other issues that we could have, greed, corruption, all of the other things, then many of these issues. The reality is that the marketplace is going to be talking about climate change. And so how do we how do we open the door to have that conversation and to be relevant? In the 21st century, what is going to get people coming into our churches? It's going to be talking about things they're worried about. And I believe climate change is that issue. And yes, I believe there are some theological areas, and Dominion is one that drives me nuts, where I think, you know, we haven't really answered in a broader context. And maybe some of our church leaders need to go on a journey. I know Simon Ponsonby at St Aldate's would say that he's been on a journey over the last 4 years to really understand, and has moved very significantly from the kind of traditional view of Dominion to what does it mean for equality and fairness and poverty and justice.
That's good, Paul. The other thing I would make a comment on is one who's been involved in theological education is that you have to be able to get into seminaries and start to shape some of the curriculum in terms of training pastors, because we do what we're told to do. And when you're a trained pastor, both in terms of theology and what you teach in terms of our understanding of what mission is, but also more practically, how do you administer a church so that you take effective action? And that is something that often doesn't appear in seminary curriculums, is how do you go about getting a congregation into transformative action?
So Margot Hodgson is already working with Cuddesdon, and we're talking to Wycliffe as well about how we can start teaching and training that education, but also help them with the emotional and behavioral side of how they're going to deal with climate grief, because these are going to be issues that
Could be
leaders
huge
have to
issues.
face.
Well, good, Paul. I think I will tie a bow on this. Very good lecture, and it's been an excellent contribution to the future of mission. I think this is the future of mission, and we look forward to how the Anglican Church and the churches globally begin to respond to this important issue. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And if you are interested in the recording of this, or you have someone who wants to hear this, please contact me and I'll make that available. And so with that, thank you very much. And until next week, take care.
Thank you.